Gather round, Sooner Nation. It's Wednesday, 11:30 a.m. local time, and it's time for Oklahoma Sooners Live here for a 52nd edition. Wow, 52 weeks in a year. How about that? Jason Ray and myself getting together again. Guess we've done this now, Jason, for a year straight.
That's cause for celebration, isn't it?
I didn't realize until I saw that number right in front of me there. So this is we've been pretty reliable here. 52 for 52, 52 consecutive weeks. And Jason has obviously anchored our post-game coverage of Oklahoma football and done a number of other live streams during times of breaking news. So it's been a good year, Jason. We appreciate you being here and appreciate you helping us build this Oklahoma channel.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Comments and questions, of course, leave them in the live chat, and we will get to them as we make our way through Oklahoma spring practice with the spring game on the 16th, correct?
23rd.
23rd. So we still have 2 weeks plus a few days to get set for the spring game. So Rufus Alexander, of course, was a standout linebacker at Oklahoma, moved on to the NFL for a brief career. And so he's been added as a off the field analyst, correct?
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. That was kind of something that happened a day or two ago. Hadn't heard a ton of information on it, in terms of it's not like an official announcement that Oklahoma has made or anything like that. But another very, very quality guy that Oklahoma has kind of off the field. It's been interesting who Oklahoma has brought back, and in terms of analyst. Phil Lodeholt was a former actually Oklahoma offensive lineman has been brought back as an off the field analyst. So they're bringing, they're keeping a lot of it within people that they're familiar with within the program. So Oklahoma's doing a lot in building up that kind of that off field assistant. Coaching staff, to be more in line with the Clemsons, the Alabamas, the Ohio States of the world, where Oklahoma has been a little bit behind over the last couple of years, but they're bolstering that to a level where it's on par with some of those other schools, and it's just so important. And Brent Venables talked a little bit about it, a couple of weeks ago, really just talking about how they only have so much time with these kids in the spring, so much time, so many practices, so many hours. And so it's just very vitally important just to have all of these guys out there from a practice perspective, just to be able to kind of help from an organization side, and just, making sure that they're making full, being completely efficient with the time that they have in spring, and then meetings and on-field work as well.
Jason Ray, last word on college football. Check out his work over there. And of course, Oklahoma Sooners Live is here every Wednesday. We just ask that you'd like the video and tell people that we're here. And again, we've been consistent Wednesday at 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 Central. Leave your comments and questions in the live chat. We will get to them. There's a lot of somewhat periphery news involving Oklahoma that we'll get to in a few minutes. Bob Bolesby stepping down at some point. Big 12 commissioner Josh Connerly with Oklahoma on his 6-team list, but they're a little bit maybe not quite at the top of the list, apparently. So looking at a few of those things a little bit later, but more importantly, what's happening, Jason, on the practice field currently. What has caught your eye recently?
Yeah, I think, and a lot of this was to be expected. I think when you look at the quarterback position, Dylan Gabriel has continued to really look the part, really efficient in Levy's offense. Just from things that you hear he's taking on, he's very much embracing that leadership role within the team. Like I said, we talked about this a little bit last week, that he already came into Oklahoma with a little bit of street cred based on what he's done, at UCF, and so I think he's not only brought that with him, but he kind of enhanced his leadership ability. He's one of the kids that works with a lot of these receivers and running backs and offensive linemen, just people generally offensive guys, just helping them learn the system a little bit, things that they can do off the field, whether it's within the within the walls, or taking his own time personally to do that. So a lot of good leadership qualities that you like to see out of your quarterback, particularly a guy that you're counting on to be to be your biggest playmaker, certainly at the quarterback position. And I think, as people would expect, some of the other kids are a little bit, not that they're performing badly, but it's just one of those things you can see the clear difference. And Gabriel, a guy that's had 3 years of experience, versus some kids that's just really never played at this level before. So I think it'll be a good maturation process for those kids through spring, and obviously through summer and fall camp, just to get them to a level where they need to be, just to be a capable backup if that happens. Because there's the chances of Oklahoma, of a quarterback becoming available from a transfer portal side that meets Oklahoma's needs, and someone that would be willing to be a backup, may not necessarily materialize in terms of someone that Oklahoma would like to offer a scholarship to. So I think to a certain degree you're probably looking at what you have here. But I think very, very pleased with what Gabriel has been doing. A name that I continue to hear a lot of, is from a running back perspective, is Javonte Barnes. I think he's a guy that a lot of us thought had the body, from a physicality perspective, to be able to compete right away. And some people I've talked to have went so far as to say they feel like he's their best running back at this point. Through spring has performed even better than Eric Gray or Marcus Major. Major's been a little bit dinged up with some minor injuries, but nothing that's really kind of curtailed him. But he's a guy that really shows out in speed, athleticism, and strength in a lot of the kind of individual drills that they do. So I think for him, it's just one of the big things for new guys, specifically as a true freshman, to be able to get on the field, outside of the physicality and the body type, I think, is the ability to block as a running back, pick up blitzes, and I think understand the offense. And so, like I said, everything that I've heard seems to be that he's performing at a really high level. Then when you move to the offensive line, I think Kade Matauer is a guy. McCade Matauer, excuse me, is a guy that's really started to separate himself, his experience that he's had at Cal, and I think that what he's done, he's been able to, from what I've been hearing, kind of anecdotally, that it looks like he's a guy that a lot of people would be very shocked if he's not one of their starting guards to begin the season. Andrew Rame is right there at the center position. He's been a little bit dinged up a little bit, so this allowed some other guys to get some reps there at the center position. Anton Harrison, and Wanye Morris have really anchored the tackle spot. So I think those are probably your two leaders in the clubhouse, at least spring wise, from an offensive line. And I think everything that I've been hearing is that the offensive line is performing at a much, much higher level right now compared to where they were last year at this time. So, not quite sure, what is really attributed to that. I think is it more, I think Beanbo has been a little bit embarrassed of, kind of how they've played over the last couple of years. So I think it's one thing to kind of get them situated. And I think the one thing that's very interesting, Cale Gundy talked a little bit about this in his press availability, and it was a little bit of shade towards Lincoln Riley. I mean, if you want to kind of think through it that way, but Gundy said that Levy is the most polished and the most complete offensive mind that he's ever been around. So I mean, depends on how you want to take it, and there was kind of interesting because there was a follow-up question asked to Cale Gundy about that, and he talked about how polished that Jeff Lebby was in all aspects of the offense, meaning understanding everything that the offensive line should be doing and is doing, and understanding the running game, and making that a focal point of the offense. And that's something that he spoke to, that Riley had started learning that, and he probably wasn't as polished as Lebby was. So I think I say that to say that perhaps maybe the offensive line, Lebby did play offensive line at Oklahoma. He knows that position really, really well. So I think maybe the benefit that Oklahoma's seeing early on is that Lebby is really in tune to the offensive line, where they should be blocking, what they're working towards, and what the fits look like, and the changes and the calls up front. So I think that might be a little bit, but I think they all understand probably what the weak point, perceived weak point of this Oklahoma offense could possibly be. And then lastly, from an offensive perspective, then we can kind of move to the defensive side of the ball. I think the receivers. I think Jalil Farouk is a guy that seemed to kind of pronounce himself a little bit more in the spring than possibly he did last year. Obviously, being a true freshman last year was a little bit hard, but I think he started to. Obviously, he got that opportunity in the Alamo Bowl, and I think he's taken that, had a really good winter, and then is showing that playmaking ability early on in spring practice here.
And the comment that was made about the offensive coordinator role, that's how it hit me. Again, reading between the lines, that I think that there are offensive minds out there that kind of restrict their thought process to the skill positions and the quarterback, kind of detach the offensive line and say, okay, well, we've got an offensive line coach. Just do your jobs, do your assignments, block, make sure guys are out of our way so we can then operate with the football in our hands, versus there being maybe a next level or next layer to that that could be beneficial for somebody that sees it as one unit. That, we've got the skill position portion of it, and we're looking for matchups, and we're looking that the play generally involves just, of course, there's a blocking scheme, but the distribution of the ball, versus let's put it all together and understand that certain play calls are better based on the strengths or weaknesses of our offensive line, or fit better with a certain type of blocking scheme that they can execute better than other blocking schemes, and that being more of a consideration than maybe it is with other offensive minded people that, again, are just matching up guys in space and thinking more in that direction solely.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I think one of the things, I mean, to your point, Mark, I think in terms of blocking schemes, I think one of the things that I've consistently heard over the last couple of years related to Riley's run scheme is very complex, very kind of difficult to learn type of situation. So if you've got offensive linemen that are maybe a little bit more of a lower football IQ type of individual, don't really have the ability to understand, and maybe they're thinking a little bit too much on the field versus going. And so I think that's something that'll be interesting to kind of look at as you watch Oklahoma in the spring, and then certainly in the fall as well, just to see if the lack of complication on the offensive line, and not necessarily saying it's not still going to be there to a certain degree. So it's a little bit different, I think, as you're stressed maybe in a little bit of a different way as an offensive lineman this year as you were in previous years, meaning Oklahoma wants to go. Lebby wants to go really, really fast. They've talked about this numerous times in the spring about, that's been a little bit of a challenge for Oklahoma. Not in terms of they can't do it, just something that they've not really done a whole lot under Riley, especially over the last 2 or 3 years. You remember they went a little bit faster with Baker, went a little bit faster with Kyler, but then they started slowing things down a little bit over the last 2-3 years. So, and even at that, they never went as fast as what Lebby does. You watch UCF, you watch Ole Miss the last couple of years, you know how fast they get up to the line and they're snapping the ball very, very quickly, within 3 to 5 seconds in a typical fashion. So I think that's a little bit of a different stress but everything I've heard the kids are taking to it and they're learning things really, really quickly. And so I think Levy had talked about they are going to intentionally stress them a lot during the spring, and then hopefully they're in a position where they've got that on the job training, so to speak, here in the spring, and then they take a lot of time during the summer period to really just kind of learn learn that playbook, learn how to play, and specifically with some of their 7-on-7 stuff that they do in the summer, I'm sure.
Yeah, I remember watching an Ole Miss Alabama game early in 2020, and of course, Alabama marched on to a national championship, and by season's end, had a national championship caliber defense. But that is probably the worst I've ever seen an Alabama defense under Nick Saban look. They gave up 48 points and they gave up a zillion yards. I don't know what the yardage total was. It was some ridiculous number, like over 600 yards.
Yeah.
And it was the pace of the offense. And we think of that in the passing game primarily, but it was also in the running game. Alabama just being gassed and not being able to get off blocks, and Ole Miss gashing them in the run game as well. And it was a pretty impressive display. So that's what's headed to for Oklahoma football fans to see.
Yeah, and I think fans are used to it to a certain extent. Oklahoma when Heupel was the offensive coordinator, they went really fast. When Kevin Wilson was the offensive coordinator, and this is going back a few years, but they went really fast. But yeah, to your point, I think this is a different animal, and so I think it's one of the things that probably a lot of the kids will learn, obviously, this summer, is that they may not necessarily be conditioned at this time to a point where they need to be able to play this type of an offense for a full season, so, or full game, full season, however you want to kind of look through it. So I think this summer is going to be big for Oklahoma, just to get their bodies in a position where they can be able to do that, especially if you're not as deep at certain positions as you would like to be.
647 yards to be exact. Ole Miss against Alabama in that particular game just tore them to shreds for most of the game. All right, Jason Ray's here breaking down Oklahoma football. We've got our Sooners live shows we bring you each and every week. And by the way, this is week number 52, meaning we've done this for a year straight every Wednesday. And again, we hit the mark just about every time on Wednesday, but keep in mind we've got schedules to coordinate. So subscribe. Hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live, just in case we need to change things up. But 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 Central, and we're back at it this week. So tell your friends that love Oklahoma football. And we always have other college football fan bases represented here. So if you just love college football, get on in here and let others know that you contact and are in interactions with on social media, that we're here every Wednesday. All right. Anything of note on the defensive side?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think to a certain extent, Venables is going to let the offensive staff kind of do what they do. Not that he's not having input, obviously, but I think he's certainly more in tune with the defense, as you would expect, right? I mean, that's his calling card. And I think the thing that's just it's very interesting, and I don't know. I mean, certainly the other coaches are like this, but you see the infectious attitude, the energy that Venables has brought to this program, and it's just like it's permeating through the players, it's going through the coaching staff, and it's going through, like he gets in the middle with these kids when they're with their stretching and warming up, and stretches right along with them. And so I mean, I think of this from a coaching perspective, and I think of it from what I've done, and I think it's very insignificant to some, but people that are in the day-to-day, and they don't look at the head coach as more of kind of a CEO and more of a, okay, this is a guy that's, he's willing to do these things with us, right? So he's willing to get his hands dirty. So I think that's doing such a great job at getting these kids to buy in, getting these kids to, play at a higher level. So I think while I don't have a whole lot of details, individually on how Oklahoma is, who some guys that are stepping up. Jeffrey Johnson is a guy that I've continued to hear good things about. Clayton Smith is a guy that I'm hearing some good things about from an edge perspective. And I think the one thing that's interesting is Venables does not like to play freshmen. So that's just his. It's just his mo. It's what he's had from years and years, and his mo is get those young kids in here, develop them, let them learn, and he wants juniors and seniors playing and freshmen and sophomores, learning. Unless you got one of those freak guys that you just can't. He's just too good to keep off the field. Um, so I know specifically at the linebacker position, there's a lot of freshmen that have opportunities to play. Kip Lewis is a guy, Kobe McKenzie is a guy, Jaron Kanik is a guy. So from everything I've heard, those guys they're freshmen in spring, right? They're going from, specifically Kanik is a guy, going from a very small town in Kansas, and now going to a freshman at one of the biggest universities in the country. And so, you would expect those guys to be swimming just a little bit. And so I think, when you look at the linebacker position, Mark, you hear a lot about TD Roof. I've heard his name mentioned a couple of times as a kid that I think it's interesting to see how much in the two deep he'll get, because everything that I've heard is this kid is very obviously a coach's son, a linebacker coach's son at that. So he's very fundamentally sound. He's a little small. He's a little bit on the smallish side. So I mean, and obviously you think of that from the aspect of that he came from Appalachian State. So will be interesting to see if he's big and if he feels big enough, athletic enough to make that too deep. But I think Deshaun White, David Agwebu, those are two guys that are going to be very critical to this defense. They've got to play, and they've got to play at a high level for this linebacker core to be successful. So, and Danny Stutzman's another guy who's going to be counted on to be a big playmaker. And so, I think the line. I mean, obviously, you would kind of expect the linebacker group to be a good group based on Venables. That's his calling card linebacker, and so I think he'll make sure that group ends up being kind of where they need to be. From a media availability, it was very interesting to listen to Jay Valai this week. He was there for probably about 20 answered questions, about 15-20 minutes, and I think, and this is not necessarily a ton of shade at the previous coaching staff. However, one of the things that was very, very interesting early on was DJ Graham thought it was such a value add to have Valai as a guy that has played the position. He played the position in college, has coached that position both at the next level at the NFL within the Kansas City Chiefs, coached that with Texas and Alabama as well. So I think the fact that that's kind of and when you hear him talk, it's really I think it's something that's very evident in the fact of he was a lot more technical in the way he spoke about. So I think that the coaching aspect of it, between going from Roy Manning to Jay Valai, I think it's going to be a lot more valuable for this team overall. He's another guy that is very, and not that any coaches aren't, but he's another guy that's very, very willing to get in there and, as a coach, kind of lead by example, show the kids exactly what to do. Don't be a teller, be a shower in terms of that. So I think that's something that's been valuable. I've heard Key Lawrence has had an outstanding spring thus far. I think Woody Washington's had a really good spring so far. Those are two guys that we've talked about, Mark. I will be surprised if those two guys don't start in the defensive backfield. Now, some of the others are certainly up for grabs. I think there's a lot of competition at the free safety spot. I think there's some competition at the other cornerback spot. Trey Morrison is a guy that also not as probably as firm as Key Lawrence and Woody Washington, but I think I would be surprised if whether it's at nickel or whether it's at free safety or whether it's at the cornerback position that he's not in that starting lineup. So yeah, I mean everything's been very positive. Nothing, kind of any negative that I've heard really from camp outside of I think they would like to have maybe a little bit more depth at the edge position. So I think it'll be interesting to see as spring ends and this kind of the we roll in the summer what Oklahoma does from a portal perspective, because there's a few position groups where you could see Oklahoma maybe looking at seeing what's out there and looking to improve that roster a little bit on both sides of the ball, offensively and defensively.
Talking Sooners with all of you as we do each and every Wednesday, 11:30 a.m. Central Time. Appreciate you being here as people start to make their way in about halfway through the show. So, of course, at the end of the conversation today, understand that the video will post in about 15 minutes. You can watch what you missed as we run down the Sooners on offense and defense from the last week at spring practice. Jason, you had mentioned that Brent Venable's MO is typically letting the freshmen develop, except for a standout here and there. Logan is asking whether Kobe McKenzie could possibly be one of those standouts.
Now he's a guy, Mark, that's a little bit different. When you look at some of the freshmen, him and Kanik are a little bit different than Kip Lewis. Kip Lewis is around 190, so there's right now. So I don't think there's, he's got to bulk up and but now when you look at McKenzie, he's a guy, he's about 6'3", 220. So he has the body that could potentially get in that too deep. But I don't see. And the question, Logan, no, I don't really see him being a starter. Maybe he can get to a point where he can contribute a little bit, but I don't think he's a guy that will start or play a lot early on. But he does have the ability and the possibility to play early on, but not from a starting spot or at this point.
All right, monitoring the chat. So if you got any more comments and questions, bring them on. Otherwise, I did want to hit on, unless you've got something else, Jason, with the Sooners, the Bob Bolesby announcement this week. So there's not a timetable that's been announced except for a very vague, but still later this year that Bob Bolesby's been thinking about this, has communicated this again just in the last 48 hours that he's going to step down from his position as Big 12 commissioner later this week. So here's a guy that took over the conference commissioner's role in 2012, and immediately he had to respond to the Nebraska loss, Texas A&M, Missouri, Colorado. He brought in West Virginia and TCU. And here at the end of his tenure, dealing with Texas and Oklahoma, a much more urgent matter in regards to the relevance of the conference, especially from a football standpoint. And, I gotta say that I think he did about as well as he could in regards to this latest potential crisis of bringing in UCF, Houston, BYU, and Cincinnati. If you look at the landscape of college football, those are about the four strongest programs that you would think were available. And, that might end up being his biggest legacy, was the conference expansion and contraction that he had to deal with right out of the gate. And then at the end of his tenure, 10 years later, had to deal with the same thing, and even more so because of the two marquee programs in the conference leaving.
Yeah, it's been such an ebb and flow type of career for Bolesby as the, kind of as the Big 12 commissioner. I think you saw him, I think you saw him being a little bit of what was considered, a wallflower previously in terms of, I think there was a lot of momentum probably from Oklahoma and Texas really kind of driving that is to get this league back to 12. And, he was never really able to get that done. So I think he was not really a failure point, but I think it was viewed as, maybe he's not one of the strongest, kind of commissioners in the country. And then, I think he gained a lot of, I think, respect nationally, specifically from the ACC and the SEC, where, as you remember, during that COVID year, it was really split. The Pac-12 wasn't going to play, the Big Ten wasn't going to play, the SEC and the ACC had kind of decided, okay, yeah, we're going to play. Big 12 was really the glue that held that season together to begin. So I think he got a lot of respect, and then obviously with what Oklahoma and Texas did, which, I mean, it's not completely his fault. They had a kind of a sense of blindsidedness, I believe, from Bolesby perspective. But I think that was a red flag as well. But to your point, Mark, he did, and I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, he did as good of a job as you could have expected with what he was able to, rectify from a Big 12 conference perspective, bringing in those schools that you had mentioned, UCF, Houston, Cincinnati, BYU, just to help solidify that conference. And so now you look at it going forward without Oklahoma and Texas, as we've talked about this. I think it's not quite a power, the level of a Power 5 maybe, but it is somewhere in between what a Power 5 is and what the American looks like today. Because you've got, when you look at it, you've got teams like Oklahoma State, obviously still relevant, and from time to time you've got West Virginia and you've got Iowa State, and you don't have a blue blood team, so to speak, but you've got teams that have performed very well as of late. At the college football, at the Power 5, close to the Power 5 level, I should say. So yeah, no, he's done a great job. And I think the most interesting part of this decision here is, what's that time frame look like, and does it do anything to help accelerate the Oklahoma? I think there was a question out here. Does it help accelerate the Oklahoma and Texas joining the SEC? And it's so hard. I've heard there's a little bit more momentum for Oklahoma and Texas maybe moving in the 2023 season. So I think it would probably be, when you look at it, you can look at it at a bunch of different ways, right? You can look at it from Oklahoma and Texas, like, why not stay in the Big 12 for a few more years, and you don't have to pay that $50 million. But on the same side of it, you look and see if you move, you're going to start recouping. I mean, it's only going to take a couple of years to start recouping that $50 million with the amount of money that they're going to make. So, I mean, it probably makes more sense if you're Oklahoma and Texas to move sooner rather than later, based on that fact. And I think probably, when you always, anytime you have a change in leadership that's happening in the Big 12, obviously that person is going to have their ideals that they want to that they want to instill. And maybe it's a point, Mark, where they're saying, okay, we want you guys to move on. We want to move on with what the future is going to be of the Big 12. So maybe it's more amicable, in terms of a breakup than it's had in the past. And so that's going to be interesting conversation, in terms of the timing and really when that happens. But yeah, I think like I said, there's some signs starting to point towards maybe 2023 is the season, and it's still, I mean, that's quick. I mean, that's 8 months from now. So when you kind of look at the calendar sports season for 2023. So there's some adjustments that both Oklahoma and Texas are going to make. I mean, I don't think there's very many people that have the illusion that Oklahoma and Texas are going to come in and challenge for an SEC championship year one. But I think at least on the Oklahoma side, we'll see what's going on with Texas this year. But I think with everything that they've done with this coaching change and the kind of the things that Venables has said, this is what we need to be able to be successful, be able to compete at an SEC level, that they're starting to do those things. So I think they're in the process of that. So I mean, I think it'll be interesting on the field what these two teams look like. How close are they? Do they still have some major adjustments that they need to make, or are they closer? And I think there's a certain belief, Mark, whether that's kind of an artificial belief or whether that's actual reality, is that having that SEC logo on your chest helps so much in recruiting. These recruiting battles that Oklahoma are losing to Texas A&M, or they're losing out to Alabama or whatever that might be. A big difference maker is having that SEC, that SEC on your chest, so to speak. So it'll be very interesting this year to see what the time frame of both be moving on, and if Oklahoma and Texas collectively think they're in a position that they're ready to go ahead and move on.
It becomes an interesting league in a number of ways. The Big 12 minus Texas, Oklahoma, plus the 4 that are coming on board. So I would argue that as things currently stand, all these programs as they currently stand, not talking potential, not talking history, that the new Big 12 is possibly better than the Pac-12 and possibly as good as the ACC. The issue is that unless something changes with the potential of these programs, meaning the current Big 12 members plus the 4 that are added, you're getting the 4 that are being added pretty much at their zenith. UCF's never been better. I mean, in general, of course, that 2017 team was undefeated, and then 2018 right, until the bowl game. But in terms of generally, their UCF is at its zenith as a program in its history. Cincinnati is playing better football than it ever has. They were 4-8 Luke Fickell's first year. These are programs. BYU's been a double-digit winner the last couple of years. And Houston's coming off a 12-1 season in which they reached a conference championship game. They've been a really good football program in spots throughout its history, but they've also been a 500 program. So they're getting these programs. If you want to look at the glass half full, they're getting these programs at their best. If you look at the glass half empty, you can't count on them being as good as they are all the time, because that just hasn't been the history for any one of the 4, let alone all 4. So they're getting them at their best. And so I think collectively it's a really good league, but there's you take away Oklahoma, Texas traditionally, there's no Ohio State, there's no Clemson, there's no Alabama or a number of other teams in the SEC, or even Michigan or Penn State in the Big Ten. There's no USC. There's no elite program. It's going to be a really good league and fun to watch and competitive, but are they going to have anybody that, sure, somebody might pop up like an Oklahoma State or a Baylor on occasion, but in total, I don't see the potential of them playing or having that college football playoff contender, a legitimate one. They might have a team go undefeated that gets into the playoff, a la a Cincinnati type situation, but talking about a legitimate, this team can win a national championship. I don't think that's going to exist for them. And then I think the other issue, Jason, is the Big 12 has an identity. They have a Midwest identity. They have I don't know what kind of terms. The first one that comes to mind isn't the most most positive or complimentary. Dust Bowl comes to mind, but that section of the country,
Yeah.
Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, Missouri, and I know Missouri's gone, but they're in that geographic place where now it's okay. Texas and Oklahoma are ripped out, and now they're this hodgepodge kind of Conference USA, and I don't know if they have a real identity.
No, I wouldn't say they do either. I mean, now when you look at this in the future, you've got West Virginia. Think about some of these teams that will be playing each other. West Virginia and UCF. I don't know that. I mean, that's so untraditional.
There's no connection.
Yeah, no connection whatsoever. So, I mean, to a point, yes, he did a great job in getting those teams to get in. But what meaningful connection, to your point, do you have with some of these teams? So, but yeah, no, you're right on. I think when you look at the conference from top to bottom, you could make an argument that from top to bottom that it could be better than the ACC, right? You could make an argument that it could be better than the Pac-12 in current state, right? But I think also, to your point, that, and I couldn't agree more with both sides, is that you don't have the star power of a Clemson. You don't have the star power even of a Florida State or a Miami, and from the ACC and even the Pac-12. You don't have a star power of an Oregon or a UCLA or a USC, and so when you look at that, and yes, absolutely, there could be a season here or there where Baylor, very similar to the type of season in such a way that they had this year, or Oklahoma State, or even a Cincinnati or a Houston, but year in and year out, if you have a 11-1 Houston up against 11-1 USC, we know who's winning that battle. 11-1 Clemson against 11-1 UCF. We know who's winning that battle, even a Miami or a Florida State. So their only opportunity is very similar to the discussion that we've always had about the opportunity for a non-Power 5 team to make the college football playoffs. Yeah, there's a path, absolutely. The path is very narrow, and Cincinnati kind of fell their way through that narrow path this year, but it's not something that's going to happen very often. I mean, maybe once every 10, 15, 20 years, you really, the stars will align, or the dominoes will fall in such a way that allows a non-Power 5 team, in which this is, I think inherently that's how a lot of people will think of these teams. Maybe not Oklahoma State, maybe not Baylor, maybe not a West Virginia, those types of teams. But when you look at BYU, Cincinnati, UCF, that's what's going to continue to be the thought process. Yes, they're a non-Power 5 team in a Power 5 league, for at least the time being, right? I mean, I think at some point whenever that conference, not really a realignment, but um, when they decide if there's going to be an expansion in the playoffs, I think there'll be obviously different criteria. Whether it's if they go through an automatic berth, I think the Big 12 might not be part of that any longer.
Yeah, and that's the point I was going to hit on next, is that right now we have this designation of Power 5 versus Group of 5, but it's a distinction that we all understand, that there are different levels of play. But in terms of the way the College Football Playoff Committee looks at it, there's not a rule. There are no restrictions or anything. They could go out and select 2 Group of 5 champions to be in the playoff. There's no distinction, but the playoff structures that have been proposed, and who knows if they're going to be completely blown up and we'll see something different the next time we see a proposal, or if it's just going to be a slight tweak. I would think that it's going to be something in line with what we've already seen, because there was a lot of support for it. There was a distinction made, okay, between Power 5 and Group of 5. I just it'll be intriguing to see how the Big 12 is treated, and what label it's going to be given because from top to bottom, as it currently stands, I do think it retains the quality of a Power Five league, but as we've discussed at the top, it doesn't have the potential to keep up with the other four. So.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. But I think the new face of college football is going to be interesting in a few years to see what that looks like. So, yeah.
And so, nothing official on the move of Oklahoma and Texas, but I think based on what you've talked about, what you've heard, you've discussed with on here, and we've discussed, and I brought this up as well, that more and more, it's generally just not a good situation for these schools to have split allegiances where they're technically still in one league, but they've made a commitment to another, and all that needs to be worked out are schedules and finances and legalities. So these things, it would be better for everyone if they get done sooner rather than later. And for Oklahoma and Texas, we're talking about something that was decided in July or August of 21, that they can't be playing football in the SEC in 2023. I got to think that that's what everybody's goal is.
Yeah, I would think so. And I think, maybe more than anything, and maybe not more than anything, but a big part of the conversation is that I would think the SEC and ESPN, for that matter, would be very, and for all we know, obviously they're pushing for this. We just don't have that information. But yeah, I mean, I think it would be probably the best for everyone. But I think the Big 12 is still, they still want to hold Oklahoma and Texas feet to the fire, so to speak, for that money, which you would expect. But yeah, it seems, as you kind of think through it and look at the kind of the landscape for both of the conferences and overall for college football, you think it's probably mutually advantageous for both leagues that Oklahoma is able to, and Texas is able to move sooner rather than later.
All right, everyone. Appreciate you being here. And Cam makes a decent point here. I'm going to extend on his point that I don't think there's any question the SEC is the best league in America. And I think there is a gap. I don't think it's ridiculous, like nobody can play with them or anything like that, but it's considerable, and I don't think it's debatable. And believe me, based on what I do here, the voice of college football, I would love there to be a debate. I would love for it to be close and for us to be able to argue, oh, the Big Ten might be the best or some other league might be the best. It's just not. So the SEC is the best. But again, there are Big Ten teams, they can compete, Big 12 team, et cetera, across the nation. The point here, though, is the Big 12, I don't have the numbers in front of me. The Big 12 has fared reasonably well against the SEC in recent years.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right. I think they have fared well. I think the thought behind some of that is, and this is what some of the SEC teams would probably tell you. The games that the Big 12 has fared well against the SEC are games that maybe the SEC teams didn't really care as much about, and then when the games counted, the SEC teams were more successful against the Big 12. But I mean, you just go back to last year. Look at Baylor and how they performed against Mississippi. We all know with what Matt Corral said before the game, they cared about that game. Ole Miss absolutely cared about that game, and Baylor was pretty dominant on the defensive side of the ball in that game against Ole Miss. So it's kind of a it's kind of a crapshoot, so to speak, when you have that conversation, because it's if there was more, I think it's so intriguing to look at some of these regular season games versus versus the postseason games because whether you say that these teams didn't care or they had so many opt outs or whatever, it's not necessarily always kind of an equal playing field. When you kind of when you look at that holistically.
Yeah, just to look at the overall record doesn't tell the whole story. You need to look at seedings and so forth and so on. Sometimes a conference will beat another conference in a particular year 2-0, but their 1 seed and their 3 seed beat the other conference's 8 seed and 12 seed. So you got to get beyond just the record, although that's the first indicator and that's the first thing we should go to. And I was trying to find I found an all-time record, but it's 6 years old, so we're not going to go into that. But I was trying to look at the SEC versus the Big 12. Let's see, this past season, yeah, there was the Baylor win over Ole Miss in the Sugar Bowl, and trying to come up with any other SEC Big 12 matchups. Kansas State beat LSU in a bowl game in the Texas Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Arkansas beat Texas in the regular season.
Yeah.
But a few matchups. Texas Tech did take out Mississippi State in a bowl game.
That's true. Yep.
So I'm coming up at 2-2 at this point, and we might be missing 1 or 2, but there's not that much between the two conferences this past season. All right, good stuff. Well, I think we've hit the end of the line, unless there's anything else you've got, Jason.
No, there was a question here about just kind of ticket sales for, for the spring game. I'd heard a couple, almost 2-3 weeks ago that, Oklahoma in the neighborhood of 37,000 tickets had already been sold for the spring game. And that was, like I said, as of about 3 weeks ago. I was trying to see if I could find one of my contacts information real time here, but I don't have it as of yet. But no, I think Oklahoma's making a huge push in their social media engagement related to getting people in the seats, and I think it's really important this year, maybe more than any, because I think for a lot of different reasons, Mark. I think there's more excitement within the program than there has been in the past, for one, and then you've got Baker Mayfield coming back with the kind of the statue that's going on. That'll bring some excitement and people there and stuff like that. So, but Oklahoma's going to have and then we can hopefully talk through this a little bit more when I get some of the names more solidified. But it's going to be a gigantic recruiting weekend for Oklahoma. On the 23rd, they're going to have a ton of kids coming in, for official visits for that, or some unofficial in the 2023 and 2024 cycle. So we can talk, like I said, we can talk about that next week. But yeah, there's a lot of excitement, and I'm sure it'll get in the neighborhood of 60 to 70 people, or 60 to 70,000 people. I don't know if there's not a whole lot of teams that sell out, stadiums for a spring game. Like Alabama's one. I'm trying to think. Georgia was, I think, right there last year. Clemson's probably right there, but I think it'll be interesting to see what that looks like.
Also, keep in mind, folks, that there are a ton of spring games these next 3 weeks, the 9th, the 16th, and the 23rd in particular. So we're going to be all over it these next 3 Saturdays. So I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. This past weekend, we did a Michigan watch party. They were the only team really on the map this past Saturday. But coming up this Saturday, it's 15 or 20 major schools playing. So we will be live for much of the day on the Voice of College Football over on the main channel. And so join us and jump on into the live chat, and we will have the phone lines open as well. All right, we'll be back next Wednesday for Oklahoma Sooners Live. Jason, appreciate you being here, and have a great rest of your week.
No problem, Mark. Thanks. You too.